Hey, everyone. Get ready for a super fun story that's going to grab your attention and keep you guessing. Picture this, it's a bright, sunny afternoon in a quiet little neighborhood. The birds are chirping, the grass is green, and everything feels calm and happy. That's where I come in. Hi, I'm Jake. I'm just a regular guy who loves messing around in my yard. I like planting flowers, trimming bushes, and making my little piece of the world look nice. But my favorite thing? My goofy garden gnomes. Yup, those funny little statues with pointy hats and big, silly smiles. I've been collecting them for years, and they sit all around my flowers, just hanging out, looking cute. They don't hurt anyone, right? They're harmless. I mean, who doesn't like a tiny guy with a beard and a goofy grin? But not everyone agrees with me. Oh no. Let me tell you about Karen. She's the big boss of our neighborhood, or at least she thinks she is. Karen is the queen of the HOA, that's the group that makes rules for our street. She walks around like she owns everything, holding a clipboard and staring at people with mean eyes. If something doesn't fit her idea of perfect, she gets mad. Real mad. And guess what? My gnomes were her biggest problem. She hated them. Every time she walked by my house, she'd stop, glare at those little guys, and shake her head like they were the worst thing she'd ever seen. To her, my gnomes weren't cute, they were trouble. So, here's a question for you, what do you think? Was Karen right to hate my gnomes, or was she just looking for something to complain about? Drop your answer in the comments below, I want to know what you think. Oh, and while you're at it, tell me where you're watching from today. I love hearing from you. Now, here's where things get interesting. Karen thought I was just some guy who liked silly statues. She had no idea I was more than that. I had a secret, a big one. And that secret was going to shake up her whole world. She didn't know it yet, but I wasn't just Jake, the gnome lover. I was Jake with a plan. A plan she'd never see coming. Let me set the scene for you. My house is a small one, right at the end of a quiet street. It's got a little porch where I sit sometimes, sipping lemonade and watching the world go by. My yard isn't huge, but it's mine, and I've worked hard to make it special. I've got bright red flowers along the fence, a patch of green grass, and, of course, my gnomes. There's one with a blue hat holding a tiny shovel. Another one's got a red coat and a fishing pole. My favorite? A chubby little guy with a big white beard and a goofy wink. They're all different, and I love them like they're my little buddies. Every time I add a new one, I smile because it feels like my yard is getting happier. The neighborhood is pretty normal. Kids ride bikes down the street, dogs bark at squirrels, and people wave when they pass by. It's a friendly place, well, mostly. Everyone gets along, except when Karen shows up. She's tall and loud, with sharp eyes that miss nothing. She wears fancy clothes, like she's going to a big meeting, even though she's just walking around our little street. That clipboard of hers? It's like her magic weapon. She writes down every tiny thing she doesn't like: too many leaves on someone's lawn, a car parked a little crooked, or, you guessed it, my gnomes. She's the kind of person who thinks rules are more important than fun. The first time Karen saw my gnomes, I was out in the yard, planting some daisies. She marched right up to my fence, her shoes clicking on the sidewalk, and pointed at my little buddies. "What are those?" she asked, like I'd put up a giant pile of trash. I looked up, wiped some dirt off my hands, and said, "Oh, those are my gnomes. Aren't they cool?" She didn't think so. Her face got all scrunched up, like she'd just smelled something bad. "They're ugly," she snapped. "And they don't belong here. This is a nice neighborhood, Jake. We have standards." Then she wrote something on her clipboard and walked away, leaving me standing there, confused. I didn't get it. Ugly. My gnomes. They were awesome. Sure, they weren't fancy or expensive, but they made me happy. I shrugged it off that day, thinking maybe Karen was just having a bad morning. But oh boy, was I wrong. That was just the beginning. Karen wasn't going to let my gnomes stay without a fight. She was ready to make my life a big headache, all because of some little statues with funny hats. But here's the thing, she didn't know me. Not really. To her, I was just the quiet guy who lived at the end of the street. The guy who waved hello and didn't cause trouble. She thought I was easy to boss around. She thought she could scare me into getting rid of my gnomes with her mean looks and her stupid clipboard. But I wasn't scared. I was ready. See, I had something she didn't expect. A secret so big, it was going to flip everything upside down. And the best part? She was walking right into it without even knowing. Let me tell you a little more about how this all started. I've lived in this neighborhood for a couple of years. When I moved in, it was just me and a few boxes. I didn't have much, but I wanted to make my house feel like home. That's when I got my first gnome. I found him at a garage sale down the street. An old lady was selling him for $1. He had a chipped hat and a big smile, and I thought, why not? I brought him home, set him by my front steps, and smiled every time I saw him. After that, I couldn't stop. Every time I saw a gnome at a store or a flea market, I'd grab it. Pretty soon, my yard was full of them, 10, then 20, then more. They were like my little team, guarding my flowers and making my yard feel alive. Most people liked them. My neighbor Tom, who lives next door, would laugh and say, "Jake, you've got the weirdest yard on the block." Kids walking by would point and giggle. Even the mailman, Mr. Carter, would stop and say, "Those little guys crack me up." It was all fun and games until Karen decided she was the boss of everything. She didn't just dislike my gnomes. She acted like they were breaking some big, important law. And she was going to do whatever it took to get rid of them. The funny thing is, I didn't mind her at first. When I moved in, she came over with a fake smile and a plate of cookies. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, all sweet and nice. "I'm Karen, head of the HOA. We like to keep things neat around here." I thanked her, ate the cookies, and figured she was just a little bossy but not a big deal. Boy, was I wrong. Those cookies were the last nice thing she ever did for me. Once she saw my gnomes, it was like I'd declared war. She stopped smiling and started glaring. Every day, she'd walk by, stare at my yard, and scribble on that clipboard. I could tell she was planning something. And soon, I'd find out exactly what. But let's go back to that sunny afternoon. It was a perfect day. The sky was blue, a soft breeze was blowing, and I was outside, watering my flowers. My gnomes were all lined up, looking happy as ever. I was humming a little song, feeling good, when I heard her voice. "Jake," she yelled, stomping toward me. I turned around, and there she was, Karen, clipboard in hand, her face red with anger. "Those gnomes have got to go," she said, pointing at them like they just robbed a bank. I blinked at her. "What's wrong with them?" I asked. She crossed her arms and huffed. "They're tacky. They're cheap. They make the street look bad. I'm giving you 1 week to take them down, or else." Then she turned and marched off, leaving me standing there with my watering can, wondering what "or else" meant. That's when I knew this wasn't just about gnomes. This was personal. Karen didn't like me, or at least, she didn't like that I wasn't following her rules. She wanted to control everything, and my little statues were standing in her way. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't just some guy she could push around. I had a secret, a big, juicy secret that was going to change everything. And while she was busy hating on my gnomes, I was getting ready to turn the tables. So, what do you think so far? Was Karen being fair, or was she just mean? And what do you think my secret could be? Tell me in the comments. I can't wait to hear your guesses. This is just the start, and trust me, it's going to get wild. Karen thought she was in charge, but she had no idea what was coming. Stick around, because the story is about to get really good. Okay, guys, buckle up. Things are about to get exciting. Let's talk about how Karen started her big war on my gnomes. It all kicked off one morning, and boy, was it a wild start. I was just waking up, rubbing my eyes, and looking out my window. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and my little gnomes were sitting there in the yard, smiling like always. Everything seemed normal until I saw her. There was Karen, standing right on my lawn. She wasn't just passing by, oh no. She was planted there, hands on her hips, looking mad as a wet cat. Her face was all scrunched up, and she was staring at my gnomes like they'd done something awful. Then she started yelling. "These ugly things are ruining our property values," she shouted, pointing at my little buddies. Her voice was loud enough to wake up the whole street. I blinked, still half asleep, and stepped outside in my pajamas. "Karen, what's going on?" I asked, trying to figure out why she was so upset. She turned to me, her eyes narrow and mean. "These gnomes," she said, waving her hand at them. "They're terrible. They make our neighborhood look cheap and silly." I looked at my gnomes, the one with the blue hat, the one with the fishing pole, the chubby one with the wink, and I couldn't help it. I laughed. "They're just decorations, Karen," I said, smiling. "Relax. They're fun." But Karen didn't think it was funny. Not one bit. Her face got even redder, like a tomato about to burst. "Fun," she snapped. "This isn't about fun, Jake. This is about rules." Then she pulled out her clipboard, that big, scary clipboard she always carried. She scribbled something down fast, her pen moving like lightning. I tried to peek, but she turned away, hiding it like it was a secret treasure map. "You'll see," she muttered under her breath. "Fines. Violations. This isn't over." Then she stormed off, her shoes stomping the ground so hard I thought she'd leave holes in my grass. I stood there, scratching my head, watching her go. What was she so mad about? They were just gnomes. A few days passed, and I figured maybe Karen was done yelling. Maybe she'd found something else to complain about, like a crooked mailbox or a loud dog. But nope, I was wrong. One afternoon, I went to check my mailbox, humming a little tune, when I saw it, a letter. It wasn't a friendly one, either. The envelope had big, bold letters on it that said HOA notice. My stomach did a little flip. I opened it up, and there it was, a nasty note, written in sharp, angry words. "Dear Jake," it started. "Your garden gnomes are against HOA rules. They are ugly and not allowed. Remove them by next week, or you will pay a fine of $50. Sincerely, Karen, HOA President." I read it again, just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. $50? For my gnomes? And she called them ugly? That hurt my feelings a little, I won't lie. I sat on my porch, holding that letter, staring at my gnomes. They didn't look ugly to me. They looked happy, sitting there by my flowers, minding their own business. But Karen? She wasn't going to let this go. She wanted them gone, and she was ready to fight dirty. I could have gotten mad right then. I could have marched over to her house and yelled back. But I didn't. I just folded the letter, put it in my pocket, and smiled. See, I wasn't scared of Karen. I wasn't going to cry or give up. I had a trick up my sleeve, a big one, and she didn't even know it. So I stayed calm. I watched. I waited. Things started getting weirder after that letter. The neighbors, people I'd always been friendly with, began acting funny. I'd wave at them like usual, and some would wave back, but others, they'd look away quick or whisper to each other when I walked by. One day, I was watering my flowers when I heard them. Two ladies from down the street, Mrs. Miller and Mrs. Tate, were standing by their fence, talking in low voices. "Jake's gonna lose this one," Mrs. Miller said, giggling a little. "Karen's got him pinned. Those gnomes are toast." Mrs. Tate nodded. "Yup, she's tough. No one beats Karen when she's mad." They didn't see me standing there, but I heard every word. My ears got hot, and I felt a little annoyed. Lose. Toast. Not if I could help it. I didn't say anything, though. I just kept watering my plants, pretending I didn't hear. My gnomes winked at me, like they were saying, "Don't worry, Jake. We've got this." And they were right. I wasn't going to let Karen or the whispering neighbors get me down. I had a plan brewing, and it was going to be awesome. Karen thought she could boss me around, but she had no clue who she was messing with. Not yet. The next day, Karen came back. This time, she didn't yell, at least, not right away. I was in my yard, fixing a little birdhouse I'd made, when I saw her walking up the street. She had that clipboard again, and her eyes were locked on my gnomes. She stopped at my fence, staring hard, like she was trying to burn holes in them with her brain. "Jake," she said, her voice all serious. "Did you get my letter?" I looked up from my birdhouse and nodded. "Yup," I said, keeping it short. She tapped her clipboard with her pen. Good. So when are you taking these things down? She asked, pointing at my gnomes again. I shrugged. I like them, Karen. They're staying. Her mouth opened a little, like she couldn't believe I'd said that. Staying, she repeated. You're choosing to break the rules. I stood up, brushing dirt off my hands. They're not hurting anyone, I said. Why do you hate them so much? That's when she got loud again. Because they're an eyesore, she shouted. This is a nice neighborhood, Jake. People want to live somewhere pretty, not somewhere that looks like a junkyard. A junkyard? My yard? Now she was just being mean. I took a deep breath and said, well, I think they're cool. And I'm keeping them. Karen's eyes got big, and she scribbled something else on her clipboard. Fine, she said, her voice cold. You'll regret this. Then she turned and marched away, her clipboard swinging like a sword. I watched her go, feeling a little mad but mostly calm. She thought she'd won that round, but she didn't know I was just getting started. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of water, looking at my gnomes in the moonlight. They seemed to glow a little, like they were proud of me for standing up to her. I smiled and whispered, don't worry, guys. We're not done yet. See, I wasn't just sitting there, letting Karen push me around. I was watching her every move. I was waiting for the right moment. Because Karen had no idea who I really was. The days after that got even crazier. Karen didn't just stop with the letter and the yelling. She started showing up all the time. One morning, I looked out my window and saw her taking pictures of my yard with her phone. Click, 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 she snapped shots of every gnome, like she was building some big case against me. I stepped outside and waved. Morning, Karen. I called, trying to be nice. She didn't wave back. She just glared and kept taking pictures. This is evidence, she said, holding up her phone. You're going to wish you listened to me. Evidence. For what? It was so weird, but I didn't let it bug me. I just smiled and went back inside. Then the rumors started. I'd walk to my mailbox or mow my lawn, and I'd hear people talking. Karen's calling the city, one neighbor said. She's gonna fine him big time, another whispered. Even Tom, my next door neighbor who liked my gnomes, pulled me aside one day. Jake, he said, looking worried. Karen's serious. She's telling everyone you're trouble. Maybe you should just move the gnomes. I shook my head. Nah, Tom, I said. I'm not giving up that easy. He sighed and walked away, like he thought I was crazy. Maybe I was a little crazy, but I wasn't scared. I was ready. Karen kept the pressure on. One afternoon, she knocked on my door, bam, bam, bam. I opened it, and there she was, holding a new letter. This is your last warning, she said, shoving it into my hands. Get rid of those gnomes, or I'm reporting you to the city council. They'll make you pay hundreds of dollars. Her eyes were wild, like she was enjoying this. I took the letter and said, thanks, Karen. I'll think about it. She smirked, thinking she'd scared me, and walked off. But I wasn't scared. I was calm. I opened the letter, read it, and tossed it on my table. Hundreds of dollars. For gnomes. She was nuts. By now, the whole neighborhood was buzzing. People stopped waving at me. Some even laughed when I walked by, like I was the big loser in some game. Poor Jake, I heard one lady say. Karen's gonna crush him. Crush me? Not a chance. I kept my cool, even when it felt like everyone was against me. I'd sit on my porch every night, looking at my gnomes, and think about what was coming. Karen thought she had all the power with her clipboard and her letters and her mean words. But she didn't know the truth. She didn't know who I was or what I was waiting for. See, I wasn't just Jake, the guy with the gnomes. I was Jake with a secret. A secret so big, it was going to flip this whole fight upside down. Every time Karen yelled or wrote a letter, she was walking closer to her own trap. I didn't need to shout back or get mad. I just watched her, like a cat watching a mouse. She thought she was the hunter, but she was wrong. I was the one in control, and she had no idea what was coming her way. The tension kept building. One day, I saw Karen talking to a man in a suit outside her house. He had a badge on his jacket, and they kept pointing at my yard. Another time, she drove by my house super slow, staring at my gnomes like she was planning something big. The neighbors got quieter, but I could feel their eyes on me. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen. Would I give up? Would Karen win? They all thought they knew the answer. They thought I was done for. But I wasn't. I was ready to surprise them all. Karen's war on my gnomes wasn't just about statues anymore. It was about her thinking she could boss everyone around. She wanted to win, to prove she was the queen of the street. And me? I was the guy standing in her way, with my little army of gnomes. She thought I was weak. She thought I'd cave. But I didn't. I stayed calm, kept smiling, and let her keep coming. Because every step she took was bringing her closer to the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment she'd find out who she was really messing with. So there I was, in the middle of this big mess. Karen was loud and mean, the neighbors were whispering, and my gnomes were still standing strong. The fight was on, and it was getting intense. But I wasn't worried. I had something up my sleeve, something Karen couldn't even dream of. She thought she was winning, but she was about to lose everything. And I couldn't wait to see her face when it all came crashing down. All right, guys, hold on tight because things are about to get even wilder. The fight over my gnomes didn't slow down, it got crazier. Karen wasn't giving up, and I wasn't either. Let's jump right in and see what happened next. One day, I was outside watering my flowers. The sun was shining, and my gnomes were looking happy as ever. I was humming a little song, feeling good, when I heard footsteps. I looked up, and there she was, Karen. She was back again, and this time, she had her phone out. She wasn't just standing there yelling like before. Nope, she was snapping pictures of my gnomes. Click, 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 her finger kept hitting the button, taking shot after shot. She moved around my yard like a detective, getting close-ups of the gnome with the blue hat, then the one with the fishing pole, and even my chubby guy with the big wink. I stood there, holding my watering can, watching her. "What are you doing, Karen?" I asked, keeping my voice nice and calm. She didn't even look at me at first. She just kept taking pictures. Then she straightened up, held her phone high, and barked, "I'm reporting this to the city." Her voice was loud and sharp, like she wanted the whole street to hear. "These gnomes are a problem, Jake, and I've got proof now." I tilted my head, still holding that watering can, and smiled. "Proof of what?" I asked. "They're just sitting there." That made her mad, really mad. Her face turned red, and her eyes got all squinted. "You think this is a joke?" she snapped. "You'll see. The city's going to make you take them down." Then she waved her phone at me like it was a magic wand and marched off, her shoes stomping the ground. I waved at her as she left. "Have a good day, Karen," I called out, still smiling. That made her stop for a second. She turned around, glared at me, and then kept going. I could tell she hated that I wasn't mad or scared. She wanted me to yell back or beg her to stop, but I didn't. I just stood there, watering my flowers, acting like nothing was wrong. Inside, though, I was laughing a little. She thought those pictures were going to win her war, but she didn't know I had something up my sleeve. Something big. Things didn't stop there. A few days later, something even weirder happened. It was nighttime, and I was inside my house, watching TV. The lights were off outside, and the street was quiet. I got up to grab a snack from the kitchen when I saw something out my window, a little flash of light moving around my yard. I squinted, trying to figure out what it was. Then I saw her. Karen. She was sneaking around my lawn with a flashlight, creeping like a spy in a movie. She moved slow, shining that light on my gnomes, looking at them one by one. What was she doing? I watched her from the window, staying still so she wouldn't see me. She bent down near the gnome with the fishing pole, like she was checking something, then moved to the next one. Was she trying to catch me breaking some rule she made up? Maybe she thought I'd painted them a color she didn't like or added a new one without telling her. Who knows? I didn't go outside or yell at her. I just stood there, peeking through the curtains, letting her sneak around. She stayed for a few minutes, shining that flashlight everywhere, then finally left. I waited until she was gone before I stepped away from the window. Wow, Karen, I whispered to myself. You're really serious about this, huh? It was kind of funny, but also kind of creepy. She was so mad about my gnomes that she was sneaking around in the dark. Most people would have given up by now, but not her. She was like a dog with a bone she wouldn't let go. But here's the thing, neither would I. Now, while Karen was busy taking pictures and sneaking around, I wasn't just sitting there doing nothing. Oh no. I'd been doing some digging of my own secret digging. See, I'd started to wonder about Karen. She acted like she was perfect, like she never did anything wrong. She walked around with that clipboard, telling everyone how to live, like she was the queen of the neighborhood. But was she really so perfect? I didn't think so. People who yell that loud usually have something to hide, right? So I started paying attention. I listened. I watched. And guess what? I found something juicy. It happened one afternoon when I was walking to the corner store to grab some soda. I was minding my own business, enjoying the sunny day, when I heard voices. I looked over, and there was Karen, standing on her fancy new deck with another lady from the HOA. Her deck was big and shiny, with pretty lights and a table that looked super expensive. I slowed down a little, pretending to tie my shoe, so I could hear what they were saying. Karen was talking loud, like she didn't care who heard. "Oh, this deck," she said, laughing. "It didn't cost me much. I just fixed the HOA books a little, and poof money for my project." The other lady laughed too, like it was no big deal. I froze. Fix the books? What did that mean? I stayed crouched there, fake tying my shoe, listening hard. Karen kept going. "No one checks the numbers," she said. "I can do whatever I want." I stood up slow, my heart beating fast. Did she just say what I thought she said? Fixing the books, that sounded like cheating. Like stealing. Was Karen taking money from the HOA, the money we all paid to keep the neighborhood nice, and using it for her deck? Interesting. Very interesting. I didn't say anything right then. I didn't run over and yell, "I heard you." Nope. I kept quiet. I walked to the store, got my soda, and went home, thinking hard. If Karen was stealing, that was a big deal. A really big deal. And it was something I could use. I didn't tell anyone what I'd heard, not yet. I kept it to myself, like a secret treasure I was saving for the right moment. Every time Karen came by after that, yelling about my gnomes or waving her phone, I just nodded and smiled. "Okay, Karen," I'd say, acting like I didn't care. Inside, though, I was thinking, "Keep going, Karen. You're digging your own hole." She thought she had me cornered. She thought I was some quiet guy who'd give up easy. But she didn't know I'd heard her little secret. She didn't know I was watching her just as much as she was watching me. The days kept going, and Karen kept pushing. One morning, I found a new note taped to my door. It said, "Final warning, Jake. Remove the gnomes, or I'm calling the city tomorrow." I read it, shrugged, and stuck it in my pocket with the other letters. She was getting louder, meaner, more desperate. That same day, I saw her talking to some neighbors across the street, pointing at my house and shaking her head. They nodded along, like they agreed with her. Later, Tom came over again. "Jake," he said, scratching his head. "Karen's telling everyone you're ruining the neighborhood. She's got pictures and everything. Maybe just move one gnome? Just to make her happy." I laughed. "No way, Tom," I said. "I'm keeping them all." He sighed and walked off, muttering, "You're brave, man. Brave. Maybe. Smart. Definitely." See, I wasn't just fighting for my gnomes anymore. I was waiting for the perfect chance to turn this whole thing around. Karen sneaking and yelling didn't scare me, it made me stronger. Every time she came by, I'd wave and smile, acting like everything was fine. But in my head, I was piecing things together. That deck. That bragging. The way she acted like she owned the world. It was all adding up. She wasn't perfect. She was sneaky. And I had the key to prove it. One night, I sat on my porch, looking at my gnomes in the dark. The moon was out, making their little hats shine. I sipped some lemonade and thought about everything. Karen with her flashlight. Karen with her pictures. Karen with her fancy deck she didn't pay for. She thought she was winning this war, but she was wrong. I wasn't just some guy with gnomes. I was Jake, the guy who listened, the guy who watched, the guy who knew more than she thought. And every time she yelled at me, every time she tried to scare me, I just nodded and let her keep going. Because the more she pushed, the closer she got to falling into her own trap. Things were heating up fast. The neighbors were picking sides, some with Karen, some just staying quiet. The street felt different, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Karen kept coming, day after day, with her phone, her notes, her big, loud voice. She thought she was building a case against me, but I was building one too against her. And mine was way better. I didn't need to sneak around with a flashlight or take pictures. I just needed to wait. Wait and watch. Because Karen didn't know it yet, but she was about to lose everything. So, there I was, sitting on my porch that night, sipping lemonade and staring at my gnomes. The moon made them look like little glowing friends, and I couldn't help but grin. Karen thought she was so smart with her sneaky flashlight tricks and her phone pictures, but I had her number. I'd heard her bragging about that fancy deck, how she fixed the HOA books to pay for it. That was a big secret, and it was mine to keep until the perfect moment. She kept coming at me, trying to scare me with her loud voice and mean letters, but I wasn't scared. Nope. I was ready. Every time she showed up, I just smiled and let her think she was winning. But inside, I was thinking, oh, Karen, you're making this too easy. The next morning started out quiet. I was eating cereal at my kitchen table, looking out the window at my yard. My gnomes were still there, happy as ever, sitting by the flowers. I was crunching away on my cornflakes when I saw something move. It was Karen again. She was walking up the street, but this time, she wasn't alone. She had a guy with her, a tall man in a dark jacket. He was holding a little notebook, and Karen was talking to him, pointing at my house. I put down my spoon and watched. Who was this guy? He didn't look like a neighbor. He looked official. Like someone important. I stepped outside, pretending I was just checking my mailbox, so I could hear them. Karen's voice was loud, as usual. See those gnomes, she said to the man. They're a total mess. They're breaking every rule we have. The man nodded, writing something in his notebook. I peeked over and saw a shiny badge on his jacket. A badge. Was he from the city? My heart beat a little faster, but I didn't let it show. I grabbed my mail, waved at them, and said, "Morning, Karen. Nice day, huh?" She glared at me, and the man looked up but didn't say anything. Then they walked off, still talking about my gnomes. I went back inside and sat down, thinking hard. A guy with a badge. That was new. Karen wasn't just taking pictures anymore, she was bringing in backup. She really wanted those gnomes gone, and she was pulling out all the stops. But I wasn't worried. Not yet. See, I had that secret about her deck, and it was like a hidden treasure chest I could open whenever I wanted. She could bring 100 guys with badges, and it wouldn't matter. I had something bigger. Later that day, I decided to mow my lawn. The grass was getting tall, and I figured it'd keep me busy while I thought about what to do next. I pulled out my mower, started it up, and got to work. The noise was loud, but I could still hear the whispers. Neighbors were peeking out their windows, watching me. Some were on their porches, pretending to sip coffee, but I knew they were talking about me. Karen's got someone from the city now, I heard one guy say to his wife. Jake's in big trouble. His wife nodded. Those gnomes are done for, she said. I kept mowing, acting like I didn't hear, but I did. Every word. When I finished, I wiped the sweat off my forehead and looked at my yard. It looked great: green grass, bright flowers, and my gnomes standing proud. I wasn't giving up on them, no matter what the neighbors said. Karen could bring whoever she wanted, but I wasn't backing down. I went inside, grabbed a glass of water, and sat by the window, watching the street. That's when I saw Tom, my next-door neighbor, walking over. He looked nervous, like he didn't want to be seen talking to me. Hey, Jake, he said, standing by my porch. Can I talk to you? I nodded. Sure, Tom. What's up? He glanced around, then leaned in close. Karen's telling everyone she's got the city on her side now, he said. That guy with her? He's some kind of inspector. She says he's going to shut you down. I took a sip of water and shrugged. Let her try, I said. Tom's eyes got big. You're not scared, he asked. I smiled. Nope. I've got this. He shook his head, like he thought I was nuts, and walked away. Good luck, man, he called over his shoulder. Tom was a good guy, but he didn't get it. No one did except me. Karen thought she was building a big wall to trap me, but I was the one holding the key to knock it down. That inspector guy? He might have been from the city, but I had a feeling he'd be more interested in Karen's deck than my gnomes once I let my secret out. I just had to wait for the right time. The next few days were like a storm brewing. Karen didn't come by herself anymore, she kept showing up with that inspector guy. One time, they stood by my fence for a whole hour, talking and pointing. She had her phone out again, showing him pictures, and he kept writing in his notebook. I stayed inside, peeking through the curtains, keeping quiet. Another time, I caught her dropping off a big envelope at the mailbox down the street. It had City Hall written on it in big letters. Was she sending them her evidence? I didn't know for sure, but I could guess. She was trying to bury me under rules and fines, thinking I'd crack. The neighbors got louder too. Every time I stepped outside, I'd hear them. Karen's got proof now, one lady said. He's going to lose his yard, a guy muttered. Even the kids on their bikes slowed down to stare at my gnomes, like they were waiting for them to disappear. It felt like the whole street was against me, or at least, they thought I was done for. But I wasn't. I kept doing my thing, watering my flowers, fixing my birdhouse, sitting on my porch. I waved at everyone, even the ones whispering, and acted like nothing was wrong. Inside, though, I was counting the days. Counting the moments until I could drop my big surprise. Then something else happened, something small, but it made me smile. I was walking to the store again, just grabbing some bread, when I passed Karen's house. She wasn't home, but her deck caught my eye. It was so fancy, big wooden planks, shiny railings, those twinkly lights hanging all around. It looked like something from a magazine. But then I noticed something. One of the boards near the edge was loose, sticking up a little. I stopped and squinted at it. That's when I saw a tiny sticker on the side of her railing. It said custom built $5,000. $5,000. For a deck? That was a lot of money. Way more than the HOA fees we all paid. I grinned and kept walking. That little sticker was another clue. Another piece of my puzzle. I didn't tell anyone about it, not Tom, not the neighbors, not even my gnomes. I kept it in my head, adding it to what I'd heard her say about fixing the books. Karen was sneaky, but she wasn't careful. She left little hints everywhere, and I was picking them up like breadcrumbs. Every time she came by with her inspector or her phone, I'd think about that deck. That expensive, shiny deck she didn't pay for with her own money. It made me feel stronger, knowing I had something she didn't expect. One afternoon, things got even crazier. I was raking leaves in my yard when a big white truck pulled up. It had city maintenance written on the side. Two guys in orange vests got out, and guess who was with them? Karen. She was smiling this time, smirking, really like she'd already won. They walked right up to my fence, and one of the guys called out, "Hey, you Jake." I leaned on my rake and nodded. "Yup, that's me." He pulled out a paper and read it loud. "We're here to check your property. Got a complaint about some statues." Karen crossed her arms, looking smug. "That's right," she said. "Those gnomes are a violation. Tell him." The guy looked at my gnomes, then at the paper, then back at me. "We'll take a look," he said. They started walking around my yard, poking at the grass, measuring stuff with a little tape. Karen followed them, pointing and talking fast. "See? They're too close to the fence. And they're ugly. They don't belong here." I stood there, still leaning on my rake, watching. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just let them do their thing. After a while, the guy came back over. "We'll send a report," he said. "You'll hear from us." Then they got in their truck and left. Karen stayed behind, smirking at me. Told you, Jake, she said. You're done. Then she walked off, swinging that clipboard like she'd just hit a home run. I watched her go, then went back to raking. The neighbors were all outside now, staring, whispering. City's here, one said. He's toast, another laughed. But I wasn't toast. Not even close. Those guys could measure all they wanted. I knew my gnomes weren't breaking any real rules. And even if they tried to find me, I had something better. I had Karen's secret. That deck. That sticker. That bragging. She thought she was closing in on me, but she was the one getting closer to trouble. The next night, I sat on my porch again, looking at my gnomes. They were still there, still smiling, still fighting with me. I took a deep breath and thought about everything. Karen with her pictures. Karen with her flashlight. Karen with her inspector and her city truck. She was throwing everything at me, trying to win. But I wasn't losing. I was waiting. Every little thing she did, every yell, every note, every sneaky move was digging her hole deeper. And I was the one holding the shovel. By now, the street was buzzing like a beehive. People stopped pretending they weren't watching. They'd stand on their lawns, pointing at my house, talking about the gnome guy and crazy Karen. Some thought she was right. Some thought I was nuts. But no one knew the truth, not yet. I kept quiet, kept smiling, kept playing my part. Because the crazier things got, the better my plan worked. Karen didn't know it, but she was about to trip over her own feet. And when she did, I'd be there, ready to show everyone who she really was. Okay, everyone, get ready, this is it. The big moment you've been waiting for. Things had been crazy with Karen and my gnomes for weeks, but this was the day it all exploded. The big day. It started out like any other morning. The sun was up, the birds were chirping, and I was on my porch, sipping some juice, just watching my gnomes chill by the flowers. They looked happy, as usual, with their little hats and goofy smiles. I was feeling pretty good, knowing I'd been playing it cool while Karen ran around like a wild chicken. But then, everything changed fast. I heard her before I saw her. Karen's voice, loud and screechy, cut through the quiet street like a siren. I looked up, and there she was, standing right in front of my house, her phone pressed to her ear. She was yelling so loud I could hear every word, even from my porch. Hello, 911? Yes, there's a public nuisance on my street, she screamed. These gnomes, they're a safety hazard. Someone's going to trip over them or get hurt. You need to send someone now. Her face was red, her eyes were wild, and she was waving her free hand at my yard like she was pointing at a monster. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching her throw her little tantrum. A safety hazard? My gnomes. They were tiny statues, not bombs. But Karen didn't care, she was losing it. I leaned against my porch railing, keeping calm. She glanced at me, saw me standing there, and smirked. That smirk said it all. She thought she'd finally won. She thought calling the cops was her big move, the one that would make me rip my gnomes out of the ground and beg for mercy. I didn't say a word. I just watched, letting her have her moment. Inside, though, I was smiling. Because this was perfect. She had no idea what was coming. It didn't take long. A cop car rolled up fast, its lights flashing red and blue. The tires squeaked as it stopped right in front of my house. Karen put her phone down, crossed her arms, and kept that smirk on her face. She looked at me like I was toast, like she'd just dropped a winning card on the table. The car door opened, and a tall police officer stepped out. He had a serious face, a badge on his chest, and a little notepad in his hand. Karen practically bounced over to him, ready to spill her story. I stayed on my porch, arms still crossed, waiting to see what would happen. Here's the problem, Karen said, pointing at my gnomes. These things are dangerous. They're all over his yard, breaking every rule. I told him to take them down, but he won't listen. She talked fast, her voice getting higher and higher. The officer nodded, listening to her, but he didn't even look at my gnomes. Not once. He flipped a page in his notepad, glanced at it, then turned to Karen. Her smirk got bigger. She thought he was on her side. She thought this was it, the moment I'd lose everything. But then bam, here comes the twist. The officer put his notepad away, looked right at Karen, and said, "Ma'am, we need to talk." His voice was calm but firm. Karen blinked, confused. "Talk," she said. "About what?" "The gnomes are right there." She pointed again, but the officer shook his head. "No, ma'am," he said. "This isn't about the gnomes. We've got a warrant for your arrest." He pulled a paper out of his pocket and held it up. Karen's jaw dropped all the way to the ground. Her eyes got huge, and that smirk? Gone. Wiped clean off her face. She looked like she'd just seen a ghost. I didn't move. I didn't gasp or cheer. My jaw didn't drop like hers. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching it all go down. See, this wasn't a surprise to me. Not one bit. Karen thought she'd called the cops on me, but she didn't know the truth. Here's the big reveal, ready? I wasn't just Jake, the guy who loved gnomes. I was Jake, the off-duty detective. Yup, that's right. I worked for the police, and for months, I'd been quietly investigating HOA fraud, sneaky stuff people did with the neighborhood money. And guess who was at the top of my list? You got it, Karen. Her mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water. "Arrest," she squeaked. "Me? For what?" The officer didn't blink. "We've got evidence of fraud," he said. "You've been taking money from the HOA to pay for personal stuff like that deck at your house." Karen's face went white. She stumbled back a step, shaking her head. "No, no, that's not true," she yelled. "This is about his gnomes. He's the problem." She pointed at me again, but the officer didn't even turn his head. "Ma'am, turn around," he said. "Hands behind your back." He pulled out handcuffs, shiny silver ones, and Karen freaked out. "You can't do this," she screamed. "I'm the HOA president." But he could, and he did. The officer grabbed her arms, clicked the handcuffs on, and started walking her to the car. She kept yelling, twisting around, trying to argue. "This is a mistake. It's the gnomes. Look at the gnomes." No one listened. The neighbors, who'd been peeking out their windows, started coming outside now. They stood on their lawns, mouths open, watching Karen get hauled away. Tom, my next-door buddy, ran over to my porch. "Jake," he whispered. "What's happening?" I grinned at him. "Just wait," I said. "You'll see." The officer opened the car door, and Karen kept shouting as he put her inside. "I'll sue you all." "This isn't over," she yelled, but the door slammed shut, and her voice got muffled. The lights on the cop car flashed again as it pulled away, taking Karen with it. The street went quiet, super quiet, like everyone was holding their breath. Then the whispers started. "Did he say fraud?" one lady asked. "She's going to jail," a guy said. They all looked at me, standing there on my porch, still calm as ever. I uncrossed my arms and stepped down into my yard. The neighbors crowded closer, staring at me like I'd just turned into a superhero. "Jake," Tom said, his eyes big. "Did you know about this?" I nodded, smiling a little. "Yup," I said. "I've been watching her for a while. See, here's how it went down. Months ago, I'd started hearing rumors about the HOA money disappearing. People paid fees every month, like $10 here, $20 there, to keep the neighborhood nice. But things weren't adding up. The streets had potholes, the park benches were broken, and no one knew where the money went. I got curious. I'm a detective, after all, it's my job to figure stuff out. Then I moved here, put my gnomes in the yard, and Karen flipped out. That's when I really started paying attention. She was so loud about rules, but she didn't follow them herself. I heard her bragging that day about fixing the HOA books for her deck. I saw that sticker $5,000 for a deck when our fees were tiny. I started digging deeper. I checked records, talked to people quietly, and found proof. She'd been stealing, taking our money and spending it on her fancy stuff. I didn't tell anyone, not even Tom. I just kept it all in my head, waiting for the right time. And when she called 911, that was it. The cops already had my report. They were coming for her, not me. The neighbors were buzzing now. You're a detective? Mrs. Miller asked, her voice all shaky. Off duty, I said. But yet. Tom laughed, slapping his knee. You sneaky guy. You let her yell, and you knew this whole time. I shrugged. Had to let her think she was winning, I said. Made it easier to catch her. They all looked at my gnomes, then back at me. So the gnomes? Mrs. Tate asked. They're fine, I said. They didn't do anything wrong. She did. The street exploded with chatter. People were laughing, clapping, shaking their heads. Karen's gone, one kid yelled, riding his bike past. No more clipboard, another shouted. I stood by my gnomes, giving them a little pat. Good job, guys, I whispered. They didn't catch Karen, but they sure helped. She'd been so mad about them, she didn't see me watching her every move. Her tantrum was her big mistake and my big win. So, what would you have done if you were Karen right then? Would you have yelled? Run? Tried to lie? Drop your answer in the okay, everyone, we're at the part where it all wraps up. The big fight with Karen was over, and now it's time to see what happened after that wild day. Let's jump in, it's going to be fun and easy to follow, I promise. The street was super quiet as the cop put those shiny handcuffs on Karen. You could hear the click-click sound as they snapped shut around her wrists. Everyone was watching me, the neighbors, even the kids on their bikes. The officer held her arm and started reading her rights, like they do on TV. You have the right to remain silent, he said in his big, serious voice. Anything you say can be used against you in court. Karen's face was white, like all the color had run away. She didn't look like the loud, bossy HOA queen anymore. She looked small and scared, standing there with her hands behind her back. I stayed on my porch, watching it all. The cop kept talking, explaining why she was in trouble. Turns out, Karen had been sneaky for years. She'd been skimming HOA dues, taking little bits of money from everyone in the neighborhood. You know those fees we all paid? Like $10 a month to fix the sidewalks or paint the benches. Well, Karen wasn't using it for that. Nope. She was stealing it, grabbing thousands of dollars over time. And what did she do with it? She bought herself a fancy deck, all shiny and new, with pretty lights and smooth wood. Oh, and get this, she even got a hot tub. A big, bubbly hot tub she hid in her backyard, thinking no one would find out. Can you believe that? My gnomes. They were just her excuse. She didn't really care about them deep down. She just wanted to yell at me and boss me around because that's what she did to everyone. The gnomes were her way to act big and tough, to throw her weight around like she owned the whole street. But now everyone knew the truth. She wasn't a queen, she was a thief. And thanks to me being a detective, her sneaky days were done. The cop finished reading her rights, and Karen started wiggling, trying to talk her way out. This is wrong, she yelled. I didn't do anything. It's all a mistake. But the officer didn't listen. He opened the back door of the cop car, and another officer came over to help. They gently pushed her inside, even though she kept shouting. You'll hear from my lawyer, she screamed as the door shut. Bang. It closed tight, and her voice got all muffled. The car's lights flashed red and blue again, and then it rolled away, slow at first, then faster. Karen was gone, hauled off to face what she'd done. I stepped off my porch and walked into my yard. The neighbors were still standing around, mouths open, eyes big. I looked at my gnomes, my little buddies with their pointy hats and goofy smiles. They'd been through a lot, but they were still here, still standing. I bent down and started lining them up nice and neat, fixing them just right. The one with the blue hat was a little crooked, so I straightened him. The fishing pole guy was tipping over, so I propped him up. And my favorite, the chubby one with the wink. I gave him an extra pat. Good job, guys, I said, grinning. Then I stood up and gave them a little salute, like they were soldiers who'd won a battle. In a way, they had. The street wasn't quiet anymore. People started moving, coming closer. The neighbors who'd laughed at me before, the ones who'd whispered I was going to lose, were walking over now. Their faces were different. No smirks, no giggles. Just big, wide eyes and lots of questions. Tom, my next door buddy, got to me first. Jake, he said, his voice all excited. "How'd you pull that off?" "She's gone. The cops took her." Mrs. Miller was right behind him, her hands flapping. "You're a detective?" "A real one?" she asked. Mr. Tate, who usually stayed quiet, piped up too. "She was stealing?" "For real." I leaned against my fence, still grinning, and nodded. "Yup," I said. "Been watching her for months. She thought she could scare me with my gnomes, but I was the one keeping an eye on her." Tom laughed so hard he almost fell over. "You're sneaky, Jake." "Sneaky and smart," he said. Mrs. Miller shook her head, like she couldn't believe it. "All this time, I thought you were just the gnome guy," she said. "Me too," Mr. Tate added. "But you got her good." I shrugged, keeping it simple. "Sometimes it pays to keep quiet," I said. "Let the bad guys trip over themselves." They all nodded, like that made perfect sense. And it did. Karen had been so loud, so pushy, that she didn't see me watching. She didn't know I'd heard her bragging about that deck or found proof she was stealing. She ran right into her own trap, and I just stood there, letting it happen. It was like a game and I won. The crowd got bigger. More neighbors came out, some I didn't even talk to much. Kids ran over, jumping up and down. "Karen's gone," one yelled. "No more rules," another cheered. The grown UPS started talking fast, piecing it all together. "She took our money," one lady asked. "For a hot tub," a guy said, sounding mad. "Yup," I told them. "Thousands of dollars. I found the papers, bank stuff, receipts, all of it. She's been doing it for years." They gasped, then started laughing. "And she got mad about gnomes," Mrs. Tate said, pointing at my yard. "That's nuts." I laughed too. "Yeah," I said. "The gnomes didn't steal anything. She did." That made everyone crack up even more. The kids started running around my yard, looking at the gnomes like they were heroes. "These guys are cool," one boy said, poking the fishing pole gnome. "They beat Karen," a girl added, giggling. I let them play, happy to see everyone smiling. For weeks, the street had been tense, whispers, stares, Karens yelling. Now, it was like a big party. Things didn't stop there. The next day, a lady named Mrs. Carter came by. She was quiet, with gray hair and a nice smile. "Jake," she said, standing at my gate. "I heard what happened. I'm on the HOA board, not the bossy part, just the helping part. We had a meeting last night after, well, you know." She waved her hand toward where the cop car had been. "Karen's out. We kicked her off. And we want you to know your gnomes are fine. No rules against them." I smiled big. "Thanks, Mrs. Carter," I said. "That's good to hear." She nodded. "We're picking a new leader today," she said. "Someone fair. Someone who doesn't mind a few gnomes." Then she winked like my chubby gnome, and walked off. I watched her go, feeling pretty great. The HOA wasn't going to be a problem anymore. No more mean letters, no more fines. My gnomes were safe, and the neighborhood was free of Karen's bossy ways. Word spread fast. By the afternoon, people were knocking on my door, bringing stuff. Tom showed up with a plate of cookies. "These are for you, detective," he said, grinning. "You're the hero around here now." Mrs. Miller brought a little flower pot. "Put it by your gnomes," she said. "It's a thank you." Even Mr. Tate, who never said much, dropped off a can of soda. "Good work," he mumbled, then shuffled away. The kids drew pictures of gnomes and taped them to my fence. One said, "Jake and the gnome team win," in big, wobbly letters. I laughed every time I saw it. The street changed after that. People waved at me again, no more whispers or sneaky looks. They'd stop by to chat, asking about my gnomes. "Where'd you get this one?" a lady asked, pointing at the blue hat guy. "How many do you have now?" a kid wondered, counting them out loud. I'd tell them stories how I found the fishing pole gnome at a flea market, or how the winking one was a birthday gift. They'd smile and nod, like the gnomes were part of the neighborhood now, not just mine. A few days later, I heard more news. Tom ran over, all excited. "Jake. They checked Karen's house, he said. Found the hot tub huge thing, hidden behind a fence. And papers to prove she took the money. I nodded, not surprised. Yup, I said. I gave the cops everything I found. She's in big trouble now. Tom whistled. Jail time, he asked. Probably, I said. Stealing that much? She's not getting out easy. He clapped me on the back. You're amazing, man, he said, then ran off to tell everyone else. The neighborhood kept buzzing. People talked about Karen nonstop, how she'd acted so perfect but was really a crook. They'd shake their heads, saying, can't believe it, or good riddance. But they'd smile at me, like I'd fixed everything. And in a way, I had. Not just for me, but for everyone. That money she stole? The new HOA leader promised to figure it out, maybe even get some back. The potholes might get fixed. The benches might get painted. Things were looking up. I kept my gnomes right where they were. Every morning, I'd go out, water my flowers, and check on them. They didn't look like troublemakers to me, they looked like winners. They'd stood there through all of Karen's yelling, her pictures, her sneaky flashlight nights, and they never budged. She tried to use them to push me around, but they ended up pushing her right into trouble. Funny how that worked, huh? One evening, I sat on my porch with a glass of lemonade, watching the sun go down. The street was peaceful again, kids riding bikes, dogs barking, people laughing. No more clipboard, no more mean voice. The neighbors who'd laughed at me were my friends now. They'd stop by, say hi, and tell me how glad they were Karen was gone. You're the best, Jake, Mrs. Miller said one day. You saved us from her. I'd just smile and say, nah, the gnomes helped too. And they did. Those little guys were more than decorations, they were my team. Karen thought she could scare me into ditching them, but she was wrong. I kept quiet, let her yell, and watched her trip over her own sneaky plans. Now she was gone, the HOA was better, and my yard was safe. Justice was served, and it felt awesome. Ments I want to hear. This was the moment everything flipped, and I couldn't have planned it better. Karen thought she'd beat me, but she beat herself. And me? I just stood there, watching it all unfold, knowing justice was served. Hey, everyone. We've made it to the end of this wild story about me, my gnomes, and Karen. It's been a crazy ride, right? Now it's time to sit back, think about what happened, and talk about what it all means. I'm going to keep this super easy and fun, just like everything else, so even a 4th or 6th grader can follow along. Let's go. So, here's the thing, Karen thought she could bully me into giving up something I loved. My gnomes, they were my little buddies, my happy little team in the yard. I'd collected them over years, picking them up from flea markets, garage sales, even birthday gifts. They weren't just statues to me, they were special. Every time I looked at them, with their goofy hats and big smiles, I felt good. They made my yard mine, you know? But Karen? She didn't see that. She saw them and got mad. She thought they were ugly, silly, a problem. She wanted them gone, and she thought she could scare me into tossing them out. She yelled, she wrote mean letters, she even called the cops. All because she didn't like something I loved. But here's where it gets cool. Karen didn't see the bigger picture. She thought I was just some quiet guy who'd give up easy. She thought she was the boss, the queen of the street, and I'd have to listen to her. She didn't know I had a secret. She didn't know I was a detective, watching her, waiting for her to mess up. She thought she held all the power with her clipboard and her loud voice, but nope, I was the one holding all the cards. I had proof she was stealing, I had my plan, and I stayed calm while she ran around like a crazy chicken. In the end, she didn't bully me into anything. She got herself caught, and I won. That's the big lesson here, guys. Sometimes, the person someone's picking on, the quiet one, the one who doesn't yell back, is the one with the real strength. Karen picked on me because she thought I was weak, but I wasn't. I was smart. I kept my eyes open, watched everything she did, and let her keep going until she tripped over her own sneaky tricks. Next time someone tries to push you around, remember this, you don't have to shout or fight right away. Stay calm, look around, and figure out what's really going on. Let them think they're winning, and then bam, show them who's really in charge. That's what I did, and it worked. Think about it for a second. Karen was loud and mean, but she didn't win. Why? Because I didn't let her get to me. I didn't cry or give up my gnomes. I didn't run away or hide. I stood there, day after day, smiling at her, waving, acting like her big tantrums were no big deal. And all that time, I was watching her, picking up little clues like when she bragged about her deck or when I saw that expensive sticker. She thought she was scaring me, but I was the one scaring her in the end. Not with yelling or fighting, but with quiet, sneaky smarts. That's power, right there. Let's talk about bullies for a minute. Maybe you've met someone like Karen, someone who's loud, bossy, and thinks they can tell you what to do. Maybe they laugh at your clothes, your toys, or something you like. It feels bad, doesn't it? Like they're bigger than you, stronger than you. But here's the secret, they're not. Bullies like Karen only seem big because they make a lot of noise. Deep down, they're scared someone's going to figure them out. And when you stay calm, when you don't let them push you around, you're the one who comes out on top. I didn't let Karen take my gnomes, and you don't have to let anyone take what matters to you. What about my gnomes? They're still here, sitting in my yard, happy as ever. They didn't do anything wrong, they just stood there, being themselves. And that's another cool thing to think about. You don't have to change who you are just because someone doesn't like it. I loved my gnomes, and I kept them, even when Karen tried to make me feel dumb about it. You can keep what you love to your games, your drawings, your weird little hobbies. Don't let anyone tell you they're not good enough. If they make you happy, that's what counts. Let's rewind a bit. Picture me on my porch that first day Karen yelled at me. She was all red-faced, pointing at my gnomes, calling them ugly. I could have gotten mad right then. I could have yelled back, told her to leave me alone. But I didn't. I laughed, said they were just decorations, and let her storm off. That was the start, me staying calm while she got madder and madder. Every time she came back with her pictures, her flashlight, her mean letters, I did the same thing. I smiled, waved, kept my cool. And every time, I learned a little more about her. That's how I won, not by being loud, but by being quiet and smart. Now picture the end, the cop car driving away with Karen in the back. The neighbors clapping, the kids cheering, my gnomes still standing tall. That's what happens when you don't give up. Karen thought she could push me around, but she didn't see me coming. She didn't see the bigger picture, that I was the one in charge all along. And that's what I want you to remember. When someone's mean to you, when they try to take something away, you don't have to fight their way. You can fight your way, quiet, sneaky, strong. Let them figure out the hard way who's really the boss. What's your takeaway from this story? What did you learn from me and my gnomes? Maybe it's about staying calm when things get tough. Maybe it's about keeping what you love, no matter what. Or maybe it's about watching and waiting, like I did, until the right moment to win. Drop your answer in the comments, I really want to hear what you think. This story was a big adventure, and I hope you liked it. If you did, give it a thumbs up so I know. It's been fun hanging out with you, telling you about Karen and my little gnome team. See you in the next one. Let's keep thinking about this for a bit. Life's full of Karens, isn't it? People who think they can boss you around just because they're loud or mean. But you don't have to let them win. You can be like me, quiet on the outside, strong on the inside. I didn't need to shout at Karen or throw my gnomes at her, though that would have been funny. I just waited, watched, and let her mess up. You can do that too. Next time someone's picking on you, take a deep breath, look around, and think, what's my plan? You don't have to be the loudest to be the toughest. And hey, don't forget the neighbors in this story. At first, they laughed at me. They whispered, Jake's gonna lose, and those gnomes are toast. They thought Karen was right because she was loud and had her clipboard. But when it was over, they changed. They came over, brought cookies, said I was the hero. That's another thing, sometimes people don't see the truth until the end. They might laugh or pick the wrong side, but when you win, they'll see you differently. So don't worry if people don't get you at first. Keep doing your thing, and they'll figure it out. My gnomes are a big part of this too. They didn't talk, they didn't move, but they were there for me. They stayed in my yard, taking all of Karen's yelling, and they never gave up. That's like you and the stuff you love, your toys, your pets, your favorite books. They don't have to fight for you, they just have to be there. And when you stand up for them, you're standing up for yourself. I kept my gnomes because they made me happy, and that made me strong enough to beat Karen. What makes you happy? Hold on to it, it's your power. Let's imagine something. Say you're at school, and some kid says your backpack is dumb because it's got cartoon characters on it. They laugh, maybe point, try to make you feel small. What do? You could yell, but that's what they want you to get mad. Or you could be like me with Karen. Smile, say, I like it, and keep walking. Watch them, see what they do next. Maybe they've got their own secrets, their own mess. You don't have to fight their way, you can win your way, quiet and cool. That's what this story's about. I hope you're feeling inspired right now. I sure am, thinking back on it. That day Karen got hauled off, I felt like I could do anything. Not because I was loud or big, but because I was smart and patient. You can feel that too. Next time someone's mean, next time they try to take something from you, think about me and my gnomes. We didn't budge, we didn't break, and we came out on top. You can do that. Stay calm, keep your eyes open, and let them figure out who's really in charge. You've got this. So, one more time, what's your takeaway? What stuck with you from this story? Was it the gnomes standing strong? Me staying quiet? Karen tripping over herself? Drop it in the comments, I'm excited to see what you say. And if you had fun, hit that thumbs up. It's been awesome telling you this tale, and I can't wait to share more with you next time. See you soon.